Today on Grand Plans, we're talking about something so many families are quietly navigating, but not always talking about out loud, and that's caring for an aging parent, especially when dementia is part of the story. My guest today is Rayna Neises, a certified life coach, speaker, and author who works specifically with overwhelmed daughters in what she calls a season of caring. But what makes Rayna's work so powerful is that it's professional and deeply personal, and it can teach us about why planning ahead for caregiving can be a game changer. Rayna spent years caring for both of her parents through Alzheimer's disease, including a 14-year journey with her dad. She helped lead a caregiving team that allowed him to stay at home with 24-hour care while balancing marriage, children, grandchildren, and running a business, often from 220 miles away. She knows what it looks like when caregiving is beautiful and when it's overwhelming. And today, she's helping caregivers navigate that tension with more support, more clarity, and a lot more grace. She'll also talk about what she learned from her experience about preparing for aging and long-term care, something 70% of us will need during our lifetime. Let's get into it. All right. Well, welcome back to Grand Plans. Today, I am so excited to have Rayna Neises on the line with us. And I'm excited to talk more about her story and let y'all get to know her. So, Rayna, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah. So you've lived this journey from multiple angles, as a daughter, as a caregiver, now as a coach. Tell me a little bit more about your journey and what some things you learned that you didn't expect to learn.
Sure. So caregiving really has been a part of my life pretty much my whole life. When I was 16 is when my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Mm-hmm. She lived for 12 years and my dad was her primary caregiver, but probably like within 3 years, she lost her ability to communicate. So she would speak gibberish, but you weren't able to ask her questions or have a conversation with her. So before I was even just starting college, pretty much is when that changed. So I didn't have any of those typical college experiences, being able to call mom and have those conversations with her. Mm-hmm. I can remember even just when I got married, when I was 21, taking her to the store and putting dresses on her and pointing to the mirror and choosing the dress that she wore by her reaction, the one that she smiled the biggest at. So she was always a part of my life, but in such a different way than typically a relationship with mom. She did live all 12 years with my dad at home. Mm-hmm. He had daytime support, but he really didn't let a lot of people do things to help him care for her. And after she passed away, then 7 years later, he made a phone call to me and said, I think there's something wrong. And I said, Dad, I think we're just sensitive, after going through that, because my mom was 53. So she died at 65, which was really young. Yeah. I said, we don't really know what aging looks like because all my grandparents actually had passed before I was born. So they died before they were in their late 60s. And I said, I just think you're worried. You just go to the doctor. I'm sure it's nothing. Well, it was. And so he started with mild cognitive impairment diagnosis and then progressed to Alzheimer's pretty quickly after that. So Dad lived with Alzheimer's for 14 years. Wow. And he asked us to keep him at home as long as possible. And he had planned well financially. And so we had to struggle a little bit with that. I have one sister. What does that mean? What does as long as possible look like? But we were able to actually keep him home with bringing caregivers to him. And I was one of those hands-on caregivers with him. Wow. So caregiving has been a significant part of my life.
Wow. So y'all were in the same, how did the logistics work out? Were you nearby? Or?
Yes. No, actually, I'm 220 miles from where my dad was. Mm-hmm. My sister was 3 miles away. Okay. And so that was a little bit tricky because she was the financial DPOA. All of those things had fallen on her since she was closer. Mm-hmm. And But for me, when I went to look at memory care units, I cried. I just could not imagine. My dad was extremely physically healthy.
Right.
To the point that even in the diagnosis, he was diagnosed at 72. Well, that's not right because he died at 85. So anyway, he played senior softball. He traveled to World Series. He was just so financially fit. Even about a year and a half before he died is when we stopped taking him to the gym.
Wow.
So he just, when you tour around and you look at a memory care unit and their idea of exercise is chair yoga and his idea of exercise is lifting weights and playing volleyball 3 times a week, even though he couldn't drive himself, he was still able to do those things. And so it was really obvious that this wasn't going to be a good fit for him. Yeah. And my husband was like, if you need to go take care of him, then you need to do that. So we figured out if I stayed 3 days a week, 3.5 days a week, then it would be about comparable to bring help in as what it would be to put him in a facility full time. So I drove up and stayed with him Thursday through Sunday. And my sister spent 2 nights a week. His sister spent 2 nights a week in the beginning. And so we just kind of made the adjustments as we needed.
So it was kind of a rotating team and combined with, I'm assuming, some in-home care services.
Yes, in-home caregivers, as well as we did find day stay that he actually really enjoyed.
And people don't talk too much about that. That's, the day stay places can be a real lifesaver for some people.
Yes, I am a huge advocate for day stay. Sadly, in Kansas, where I live, the laws are so prohibitive to profit margins that we've lost most that we have. We have a few nonprofits, but their amount of daytime is significantly smaller than what we had found in a for-profit model. Yeah. So it can be challenging.
You talk about long distance caregiving. It's something a lot of people face. In my experience, I did some of the more management from afar for a couple I was helping. But what are some of the biggest misconceptions about long distance caregiving? Is it easier when you're further away? What does that look like in real life?
I think there's a lot of pluses and minuses. So as a long distance caregiver, I knew that I had to mentally put myself in a place that when I wasn't there, I was not on. I couldn't be responsible for anything. Anything that happened was going to take me almost 4 hours to get there. So I didn't sit with it all the time. And so I was able to really just drive out of the driveway, take that deep breath and just hand it off, and say, it's not mine anymore. When you live with it 24/7, you don't do that very well.
Right.
So that can be really difficult. Even when you're not living in the home with the person you're caring for, you're still, I can pop over, I can do this, I can do that. So I think my off time compared to my sister's off time looked really different. Though I was more hands-on, I think she was more constant, having that. I think as a long distance caregiver, oftentimes people think they don't have a role. And I completely disagree with that. You have a significant role. You, especially as a family member, no one can replace you and that relationship you have with your loved one. And so making those trips up to visit, spending time and making it a priority to spend time with your loved one, no matter if it looks at you being the caregiver or not, I think is so important. But there are also things you can do as a long distance caregiver. Like you said, you can pay bills, you can make appointments, I often, when we were looking at in-home care companies, I would do initial interviews. So, just looking at what needs to be done and what can be done. In this day and age, we can do a lot of things on the internet, Exactly. And so you can take a lot off of the caregiver's plate that's right there in town. So,
yeah. You have said you specifically work with overwhelmed daughters. What are they carrying that most people don't see? Some of the things that you and your sister were carrying in your experience.
I think the sandwich generation is such a huge piece of that. My sister's kids were elementary age. Mine was in high school. So there was a difference. He was a lot more independent. He didn't need me in the same way as her littles did. I think the other piece of that is just that managing 2 households.
Right.
It is really challenging. And what I find most caregivers do is they step in and do things initially without thinking that there's going to be anything else added. So, for example, the yard. It doesn't seem like a big deal to maybe go over and mow the grass or help in the garden or do the weeding or whatever. But it's not a big deal today. But when you add doctor's appointments and you add grocery shopping and you add all those other things that become a part of needing to support your aging parents, it's overwhelming. You have all those things at your own house to take care of. Right. And so I really challenge people to stop and think, what can I do? What only can I do? Because you can do a lot of things. It doesn't mean that you should. That's a life lesson for all of us, right?
Exactly.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So stepping into some of those things really early on leaves you less bandwidth to take on the things that only you can do, like be the daughter.
Right.
Like spend the time on that relationship and help to navigate decisions. Those decisions are going to be different as the daughter than they are going to be for a paid person. They can't make those decisions. So really making sure that as you're moving into the season that you're intentional about it and don't take on the things that someone else can do. I think it also trains our parents to become dependent on us. And they don't realize that they're doing that there's guilt involved of handing it off later. Right. Whereas if we train them from the beginning to share the responsibility, to let someone else take care of the yard, to let somebody else do the cleaning in the house, the laundry, those types of things, then they are more resistant to taking it later, to letting someone else take those things later.
Right. So. Yeah. And looking at the team dynamics that you experienced in your caregiving journey, can you talk a little bit about how, I know you addressed that siblings can do things differently in a caregiving situation, but what makes a caregiving team successful? What actually works? And did you see that happening in your own experience?
We teamed really well. My sister and I did not have much of a relationship before caregiving came for my dad. We just were in different locations and living life. Not that we had a bad relationship. We just weren't involved in each other's daily lives necessarily. So I often say, number one, nobody would expect me to be the baby of the family because I'm pretty bold and dominant. And I always joke that I became a teacher because I got bossed around when I was younger. And so I wanted to be able to boss somebody else around. Right. So my sister was really strong as well, but a quieter, strong person. And so for us to find how to partner together was looking at how do I find the things that she's strong at? How can I respect that? And how can I let her be her and still care her way. Her way didn't have to be my way, and my way didn't have to be her way. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges in relationships is that I said to a friend the other day, your perfection isn't the same as my perfection. So is it really perfection? Right. We have a tendency to have an expectation that people are going to be and do exactly the way we are. So I think one of the most important things is actually building a diverse team, is building different personalities with different strengths and weaknesses and letting us function within our strengths and letting other people take their strengths so that we don't have to be everything. We just need to be what we're good at. Right. And I found that even the caregivers that I didn't enjoy, they weren't my personality, or we had a gentleman that was just goofy. And I would just be like, oh my goodness, shake my head, listening to the silliness. But my dad loved it. It gave him a totally different interaction, an opportunity to laugh and be goofy himself, that he and I didn't have that relationship. So I think building out that team is really important.
Yeah. And I like how you talk about the perfection kind of being what is perfect. I mean, I think that's so important that people have an idea that it may not be perfect, but what you think is imperfect may actually be exactly the right thing. And there are things we can't control, and there are things we can. But I think building a good team is priority because it takes the pressure off of everybody, and it's always a good thing.
Some caregivers, I think, push away help without even realizing it because they are being so controlling. They're thinking they're doing the best for the person they're caring for, but what they're actually doing is telling everybody else you're not good enough.
Right.
And so oftentimes in those, especially sibling relationships, I think that can be a big factor in it, that if you're so dominant in what it looks like to care for your parents, then your other siblings are going to step back and say, you got this. I don't need to be here. I don't need to be in the middle of this.
Right. And so what's the best way to do that? I hear that a lot from people, especially when it comes to sibling dynamics in caregiving. Do you let that person just take the reins and do the thing? Or what's the best case scenario there?
Talk. You've got to have that conversation. Right. You've got to be honest and say, I came and I did this for you and you didn't appreciate it. Or the way that you told, the feedback you gave me made me feel like you don't really want this help. Is that right? Are you really want to do this all on your own? Because sometimes, again, they're saying something, they're communicating something they don't realize they're communicating. So we just have to be willing to have the conversations. And sometimes that might mean you need to bring somebody in to mediate those conversations. Sometimes you might need to bring another parent in, the one that's healthier, and be able to even have those. I just think open conversations really important. My sister and I found on Friday afternoons, my dad was at day stay, and we would go and have lunch, and we would sometimes get a pedicure. We would sometimes go to a salt room to detox, but we just spent time together. And initially it was talking about dad and all the things that were working or weren't working and trying to problem solve. But eventually it became about our relationship. It became about our families and how we felt about things. And that's what grew our teamwork, was that more than once, when I would get frustrated with her, I would just be like, she's doing the best she can do. And that's okay, because I loved her and I had a relationship with her. So I think when we have those strained relationships, they impact all of it. And if we can repair that relationship and get that love flowing again, it makes a big difference in that teaming, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And before we get into kind of what you're doing now, can you talk a little bit about the in-home care versus other options? I know you said you went into a place and you're like, no way, that's not for my dad. But what should families understand before they commit to a path like you and your family chose?
I think one of the most important things is to know that there are very few decisions we can't unmake by making a new one.
That's true.
I think sometimes we feel like we've married it and we're stuck with what we've decided, but not everything is going to be the same. As disease progresses, needs change.
Right.
And so it was interesting too, the dialogue my sister and I had as we had the conversation. She's like, well, I thought memory care would be better for him when he was more able to engage and he was had activities for him to do. And I just thought that might be good for him, the socialization. And when he can't do those things anymore, then we'd bring him home. And I'm like, totally opposite of what I thought, that as he could do the social things and he could get out and do, we would do. And then if we get to a point that physically we can't meet his needs anymore, that's when we would need support. So I think part of it's a perspective shift of what are you really looking for the person that you're caring for? What is the need? And then where's everybody's availability? I was at a stage in my life where I was able.
All right, Rayna. So tell me a little bit more about how you and your sister were looking at where your father would receive the best care.
Yeah, I think another thing that was interesting is I have sales background. So I was a teacher, but I also have worked for an education company. And so I view what's happening from a sales perspective. So for me, as I visited locations, it was really interesting. First of all, I visited on weekends. She would go during the week. So she usually had the salesperson, and I usually had like the head nurse or somebody on staff that was actually providing care. So it was really interesting, just the things that I would notice and the questions that I would ask versus what she would ask. And so I do recommend that you kind of get together and talk about some of those things, make visits at different times of the day so that you're meeting different staff members and you're actually seeing what's happening. Everybody knows that just like no two children are the same, no two clients are the same for those that are caring for people, especially in a memory care setting. But you want to kind of see what the overall personality is. Each place I visited, you notice that the people that were there were just different personalities. Some had more men, some had more women, that kind of thing. But I think those are important things to consider. What does your loved one need? My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She was a really easygoing person. She was easily overwhelmed though. And even just having more than 2 or 3 people in the house stressed her out. She would not have done well in a facility because of the number of people and the activity and all of that would have really overwhelmed her. My dad was very social. And so that was something that I agreed that he would enjoy the social part of it. And that's why a day stay was such a perfect fit for us, because it gave the activity, it kept him in a safe environment. It also gave us a nurse and other medical people to be able to consult on things when we saw changes or they would bring up things. So I really enjoyed having that diversity. I call them part of our team. We wanted as many different people on our team that saw my dad, knew my dad, and could help us as we were problem solving challenges. Yeah,
that's great. Well, and with being in a home situation, can you share with people what that's like? And that's a big commitment to have someone in the home 24/7. Not only is it expensive, it's there all the time.
Yes. And for us, we were different than some 24/7 situations because we weren't 24/7. We had family members coming in and taking over the night shift. So if the caregiver, the paid caregiver, didn't show up, then it left it for a family member to figure out how to deal with. And again, when I was there all the time, that was okay. But when my sister needed to get home to get her kids up and sent to school, that wasn't okay. So we really handled that probably different than most people. And that's one of the things that I share in my book, No Regrets, Hope for Your Caregiving Season, is kind of how we structured things differently. Yeah. Really early on, my aunt was living with my dad and she paid close attention to his morning routines. And so he developed cancer, skin cancer, had surgery, and then got MRSA in that wound. Wow. So we had a sudden change in his ability for his daily living activities. And she had paid attention and she started documenting what he did first. And I always tell people, I don't know about you, but if I don't do things in the same order every day, I have a tendency to skip something. And so when you think about how you have muscle memory for just how you get ready in the morning, do you wash your hair first in the shower or do you wash your body first? Yeah. My husband shaves in the shower. My dad shaved at the sink. There are differences. Right. So if you learn to understand what your person does, then you're not making decisions for them. You're just supporting them in their decisions. So we had really strict schedules. We had specific detailed checklists for our caregivers to say this, when my dad could choose, this is what my dad did. And we wanted to honor that. And I would tell caregivers, listen, I don't want him to know the difference between you and me because it's not about us. It's about us supporting him in his routines. And today he might not know what that toothbrush does, but tomorrow he might. And so doing the simple steps of helping him get started, handing him the toothbrush, handing him the toothpaste. If he doesn't know what to do with it, then offering, can I help you with that? Putting the toothpaste on the toothbrush. Some days that immediately meant I would brush. Some days that still didn't trigger. So we needed to move that toothbrush up to his mouth. We're just really providing the support that was needed, not more than what was needed, and not what you want to do, but what he would do. Yeah. So we actually had full manuals. We ask for great communication for breakfast. What did he eat for breakfast? How much did he eat? How much did he drink? We documented all of those things day in and day out because there were so many of us on the team. If we didn't do that, there wasn't one person who could track all that. Right. And we knew how important it was in dealing with doctors and being able to just take his overall health into consideration to know the details on those things, from bowel movements to just everything. The poor guy, it was all written down in the book, but it really made such a difference in being able to team and being able to keep that communication just flowing all the time.
And how did dementia affect that planning and all of what you had around it? And then, eventually what you came to write about and to help others with. what kind of kink does dementia throw into a well-made system like you all had?
We wouldn't have had the system if it wasn't for dementia, for sure,
Mm-hmm.
because he would have had more opinions. Mm-hmm. He would have been driving the bus and we would have been along for the ride. We got to drive the bus because he couldn't, know? Right. And so for us, it was really just, I think, knowing where we were going, because we'd already been there with my mom. Mm-hmm. We were just very proactive, and there were bad days, there were good moments, there were bad moments, but the more that we understood what he needed, the less tension we had. Right. So I look at it and say, we made the whole world revolve around him. Mm-hmm. And he was blessed to have that, because that's not reality for most of us. But because we could control the environment and make it all revolve around him, it made his life, I always said my goal was happy and healthy as long as possible. Yeah. And so I really felt like I was able to do that for him.
And how did you take what you learned through your experience in caregiving and develop it into kind of the new chapter of your career, and tell us a little bit about what you do today?
Sure. So I really, number one, have never, ever wanted to write a book. I don't enjoy writing, to be bluntly honest about it. But after my dad's passing, in fact, at his funeral, the director of the day stay and one other employee attended his funeral, and she came up and gave me a big hug and just said, "You girls need to write a book." And I was like, sure, thank you, just kind of patting her like, whatever. But the more I talked to people about how we adapted things to go for my dad and how we helped my dad live as best as he could, as long as he could, I realized that it was different than what most people felt. And I remembered thinking back to when we were trying to make those decisions, and I felt like I had a facility, or B, live with him forever. It just felt like there were so few options. Mm-hmm. And what I wanted to expand for people to understand is actually there can be as many alphabet letters as you need to make it work for you. Mm-hmm. And one isn't right and the other one's wrong. It's what choices can you make? How can you make this work? I remember when I first talked to my sister, I said, "Hey, can we do this for 6 months?" I don't know what I thought was going to happen after 6 months, but I was like, can we just give it a try? And we did. We made changes as we went. I went every weekend for over 2.5 years. And then I dropped to every other weekend. So just be flexible. And I think that's a really different perspective than what most people have when they're thinking of caregiving. And through that, I began to realize, some of the things that we did differently. And I just wanted to share those with people. As a certified coach with the International Coach Federation, I was actually coaching while I was caring for my dad, other people, just dealing with life stresses, life coaching in general, career changes, those types of things. And so I started to realize, oh my gosh, that's part of the reason why I was able to move and change and look at things differently as I cared for my dad. So I started the podcast, I released my book, and I've just been looking to support caregivers however I can, through support groups, through one-on-one coaching, as they're just caring, because you are in the thick of it and you are not seeing other options. Mm-hmm. And being able to talk through things and hear someone else who says, "What about?" or "Have you ever thought of?" It can make such a difference in what they see and how they handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. What a gift you are to a lot of people. And I know faith is a big part of your work. Where does that fit into the big picture?
I think for me, from the very beginning of finding out that my mom was dying when I was 16 years old, I knew that the Lord was my best friend and that he was going to be there for me. And if I hadn't had that foundation at that point, I'm not sure how I would have made it through my adolescence. And I just knew that God was good, and that even though this wasn't, he was still good. And from that early age, through each challenge and each trial, don't get me wrong, when I found out my dad had Alzheimer's too, I was pretty mad. And I was like, Lord, I cannot believe that we have to do this again. Mm-hmm. And I would never choose it, for sure. But the blessing of the time with my dad, the relationship that I have with my sister today, I just see God's hand in all of it. And I'm just really thankful that I have that encouragement, that I understand that piece of this life, that the Lord is good. And even when things are hard, he's there for us. And that's one of the messages that is so important to me in my podcast, because I think as caregivers, we can learn a lot of the to-dos. We can get a lot of the other things in books, but our walk with the Lord is what's going to sustain us. I used to tell people, hang in there, you're doing okay. There's really no hope without God. Yeah. And so to truly share the truth is the hope is only in the Lord, and we are walking them all the way home. And that's okay, because that's actually the plan.
Right.
And there is peace in that.
Absolutely. Well, there's the saying, we make plans, God laughs, or something like this. Yes. Getting back, and we'll end about this, but what are there plans that we can make that can make things better for our caregiving experience, not only our own, but for people we love? Does planning help? Even God's in charge, but are there things we can do?
Definitely. I think that's a great question. First of all, I think you need to ask yourself this, what have I not done? Mm-hmm. I was 32 years old, had knee surgery and threw a blood clot and should have died. And so I got a trust together really quickly mm-hmm. because it was like suddenly realizing it doesn't matter how old you are. Right. Your days are numbered. So get your affairs in order and know what you want. For my dad, because he cared for my mom financially, he had his house in order, and that gave us options. If he did not have the financial means, it would have impacted what it looked like to care for him. Mm-hmm. So you've got to get your ducks in a row. You need to know what they are. So many people are unaware. There are so many people who will say, I want to stay home. Do you know how much it costs? When this was my dad died almost 8 years ago. It would have been $144,000 a year just to pay in-home care 24/7. Mm-hmm. It's probably doubled in the last 8 years. So you have to know what you're asking, and you have to know whether or not you've planned for that. Right. If that's what you want, you need to be diligent about making sure that you really have the option to make that an option for you. Also, knowing where you want to live. Some people, my dad wanted to be in his home. I more than once said, hey, could you come live closer to me? Would you live with me? It's just not what he wanted. Mm-hmm. But financially, he had the option not to do that. So sometimes I think we have to be really realistic about what we want and what it costs. So if those two things don't work, it's not going to happen. Exactly. The other thing is just being intentional. You have to be intentional with your time, and caregiving for a loved one is going to become a big part of your life, but do not allow it to be all of your life. I hear over and over again caregivers who lose their marriages, lose relationships with their children because they throw themselves into caregiving to such a point that they lose themselves. And for me, I was very committed. Everything looked really different. My plate was totally full when I started caring for my dad. I had to let things go.
Right.
I had to be willing to say, okay, as soon as the season's over, I can pick that back up again. But right now, there's not enough of me to do that. My friendships looked different, but they didn't go away. I just had to change how we maintained our friendship. I had to be more intentional. Let's get it on the calendar. Let's make sure that we get together in the next few weeks. I had to be intentional about those things. My relationship with my husband, we talked every night at 11 o'clock. We did the things that we needed to do to maintain them. So I think that is so important when you're going into a caregiving season, is to be intentional. Don't just start doing everything and then look up and try to figure out what happened to your life. I always say we want to make sure that we're caring for them and that we walk them all the way home, but we still have a life that we love while we're caring and once they're gone. Exactly. Because that doesn't really honor them if we don't.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful, Rayna. Thank you for sharing your experience and expertise and reflections on it's such an important topic. If someone wants to get a hold of you or find out more about what you do, where's the best place for folks to find you online?
Yeah, the easiest place to connect is aseasonofcaring.com. Okay. You'll find my services there, the podcast, my books, just all of those things. So aseasonofcaring.com. Okay.
Well, Rayna, thank you so much for your time today, and look forward to having more conversations with you in the future.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
All right. What an honest and needed conversation. It was such a privilege to have Rayna on the podcast today. Caregiving is one of those experiences that changes everything, your relationships, your time, your identity, and yet so many people walk into it without a plan, without any support, and without even the language to talk about it. What I appreciate most about Rayna's work is that she's not just offering encouragement, she offers structure and perspective and a reminder that even in the hardest seasons, there can still be meaning, connection, and even peace. Anyone in this position should know they are not alone and there are resources to help. If you're listening and you are in a season of caring, or you know someone who is coming through it, this is your reminder. You don't have to figure it out alone. We are so grateful to Rayna and the work she's doing on behalf of all the caregivers out there. Thanks for listening to Grand Plans. See you next time on the next Grand Plans podcast.